Welcome to Roundtable Decision. I'm your host, Wyatt Brickenoff, and it's been a long time since we last talked. I believe it's 2 or 3 weeks since my last video or live stream, with my last event being with Anna Voltes, and when we went over some philosophy on which I want to do more on my stream. So I don't know how long this one's going to be. I just thought I would give you more of an update on my book and all the events I have going around it. I haven't done one of these in probably a good 2 weeks or a month as well, even though I wanted to keep them as a weekly occurrence. But other things got in the way, such as COVID and school going online, so I had to focus more on that. So I was just going to kind of bring you up to date on what I've worked on since we discussed on my channel. And I also plan on doing more of my novel series in the future, including the weekly installment every Monday starting from now on. And I hope to keep that as a weekly occurrence like I promised before. So I'm just going down to get to where we kind of left off. So on this first idea, and the idea I focused the most on, since obviously it's my first idea, I wanted to discuss my original plan and the original paragraphs I wrote, or really 10 pages I wrote back when I was in the community college classes. And I apologize if I'm talking slightly weird or a little bit different. I do have a ulcer on top of my tongue, or on the bottom of my tongue, I guess you would say. And it's also delayed many videos I've wanted to put out this past couple weeks. And before I kind of dive deeply into the book and what I wanted to discuss for probably a good 30 minutes or so for today's stream, I was going to give you a few other channel updates so far. So obviously I'm part of the Freedom Scoop Network, and I'm going to plug that all in once we finish on the video today. But you can simply check out everyone there, such as Ed from Ed's World, Generational Gap, R-Rated Conservative, and now the Freckles and Brit Show, who are one of the newest members to the whole thing we got going there. But originally I was going to do a few videos about the protests and certain events relating from the news that has happened over the past couple weeks since I made my video for this book series. But the problem is there's just so much information, and I'm kind of falling behind on those videos I wanted to make. So instead of the videos kind of becoming outdated and such, I was thinking I might do a live stream sometime, probably this weekend, about all of the events and what have happened and kind of my thoughts from it. From the original shooting, or not really shooting, sorry, the original death of George Floyd to the most recent event in the Wendy's parking lot. And all of the protests in between, and all of the local governments deciding in between from there. So I was kind of thinking I would do a live stream based on that instead of several smaller videos that will become outdated by the time I finally finish making them. So that was kind of all I wanted to discuss before I went into the video itself. So I thought to kind of bring us back into information, I was going to briefly discuss what my book is about, or what I want my book to be about, before we dive into where I kind of left off and a little bit of work I have put in since the last stream of the book. So essentially, the Trials of Rome book idea I have is several empires, such as the Roman Empire, and it's restart. It's after the fall, to put it in time period, after the fall of the Roman Empire, around 375 AD. So I'm going to have several different empires in this book, including obviously the Roman Empire, although it has just kind of fallen and now in not as big of a gathering as it was before. But I was kind of thinking that I wanted to bring in several other major empires into one book and kind of set it in that time period, such as the Lamans or the Spartans from back when they were the huge force they were in the past in history, So I was thinking I might bring in those sort of cultures into my book and kind of set the Spartan Empire on if they were to be in the medieval times. And I thought that was a rather interesting idea to kind of go on, and because I do want my book to kind of be a low fantasy type of series where there's a lot of fantasy books out there such as Game of Thrones, which are kind of high fantasy, include a lot of magic and dragons. And it's a very interesting book to read, and obviously has a massive following with the TV show, although the TV show has left many people annoyed with the series, but that's besides the point. It's gotten a massive following, and there's several other books kind of like Harry Potter who are also kind of high fantasy type of books, and they obviously bring a lot of attention, and a lot of people like to read them and discuss them. But I don't want necessarily my book to have dragons or other really weird type of magic, but more want it to be grounded in actual reality. And I think one of the better ways to do that is to kind of do a low fantasy. Although I'm going to combine different empires from different time periods and kind of update them or lessen them if they were empire after the Romans, but kind of bringing them back into the medieval times with some sort of fantasy type of realistic type of magic, so to speak. So the magic that might be in my book, and what I was thinking of having included in my book, is magic to where it could be believed by people who aren't as educated. So you can kind of think of it as kind of like con magic was kind of what I was thinking. So you would have people that look magical because they do certain events, and I haven't really thought of what these events might include, but I know that they did exist back in those times. And I'm sure if John later watches the stream or my research are, and I ask anybody who have kind of had helped me do this book so far, they'll be able to provide me with some examples within this realm of what I'm thinking. But essentially, you have people that almost look magical in those times, although either what they believed was 100% science and they didn't know that yet, such as like a physical or chemical reaction that later got discovered fully, or was a trick and kind of something that looked magical but really was based in total reality. So you can simply just think of that as being magic or musicians back in those time periods. So I might have something like that within my book and not so much like dragon types. So going back to what I have on the pages here in front of you, idea one was kind of a interesting idea. So as I briefly discussed a little bit already, my idea one had the original 10 pages I wrote back when I was in high school and in a co-ed class. They had to write a scary story. So instead of changing this scary story to slightly prolong the first chapter, I was thinking, well, this was John's idea of keeping that chapter whole, and making that the prologue of the story. So Catherine, who was one of the big main subjects of that prologue in this case, would become a main character in my story. And I do think that that is an interesting idea to explore, so I thought I would kind of start with that first idea. And those that haven't catched my other streams might not know that my second idea was basically keeping what is the prologue of this story and making it continue to be a chapter. So figure out how to have that main character escape, or have him substituted with like a body double who looks very similar to him, or something within that realm, and to make a prologue something completely different that I might go back to. And I'll take a quick drink, and then I'll kind of get discussing on what I was going to talk about on this live stream. Alright, so now we'll leave off kind of where I left off last time, if that makes any sense. So I was thinking, how do I want to start my first chapter with that last parts being about the prologue? And I was thinking, well, there's a couple ideas I could brainstorm and talk about. So a couple of series ago, I think it was number 2 from my live streams, I talked about what ideas I could have for each of those those parts. So I put bullet points for idea 1, and I put bullet points for idea 2. And I thought that, and I think I even have that as a smaller video now that I think about it. So if you wanted to check out those ideas and kind of my original thoughts of it, it should be in a video below, and I'll also link it to this live stream once I finish. But that's, again, kind of besides the point. But if you wanted just a little more detail about where I was thinking at the time for each of these ideas. So I thought of kind of a quick bullet pointed list / outline I could write about for this chapter 1 idea. So I thought, how about I start with describing the poor by describing the houses in vivid detail. And then I said, how about then I compare it to the rich. And then I mentioned Catherine by name but not shown. And the reason for this was, and I've discussed in other live streams, was that I almost am basing Catherine's character off of the Game of Thrones character Littlefinger. And those who don't know too much about me is, although I'm trying to write this book and kind of brainstorm ideas, I'm not exactly an avid reader or avid writer as a whole. This is more of kind of a long-term goal project I have that might lead me to reading more and writing more, obviously, by making this book. So I recently picked up Game of Thrones, and I've listened to or watched all the series on Game of Thrones on the television, but I recently got a hold of the book, and I kind of made this as a year goal to read the Game of Thrones first book. And obviously you might say, well, a year to read one book is not that much. But it's just kind of getting me started into reading, because any writer will tell you that by reading you get better with writing, because you kind of see it more in practice and you get used to more of how sentences are structured and how to base scenes or how to transition between scenes. Anything that you need to do as a writer to make a story, you're able to see kind of be shown through reading books that are considered to be one of the best. So because of that, I picked up the Game of Thrones book, and this was the first book of the entire series. And as I just said, I plan on reading this book throughout the year. And that kind of brings me back to Catherine. So Catherine was a character I want to be based off of the Game of Thrones series, because it's a series I've kind of known through mainly watching the television show. And one of those characters in that series is Littlefinger. And Littlefinger is a very mischievous, kind of cunning figure who you don't really too much know what to think about him. His motives seem rather mischievous and rather bad, but you don't necessarily know where he's coming from. So in other words, you have characters kind of like Ned or other characters like Sansa who are very direct. You know what they want, and you know how kind of they're going to do it throughout reading the first couple books and the first couple seasons of the show. With Sansa very much wanting to be the lady of the house and to be a queen or a princess of a very large empire, such as the Starks or in other empires like that. She wanted to be the queen of the house. She wanted to be the lady. That was kind of her whole thing. So you knew that was her motive. You didn't necessarily know what Littlefinger's motives were throughout the story or without the whole series. And the times where you kind of thought you know what his motives were, George R. Martin, the writer of the series, would kind of switch it up. So where at least I didn't really fully know what Littlefinger was thinking. And the times where George R. Martin wanted you to know what he was thinking, he would write it in such a way that it was still mischievous in nature. So again, that was a very long sentence of telling kind of how I want Catherine's character to be. So I want to mention her by name but not show her. And the reason I kind of wanted to do that was I wanted her character, even as you first get to know her, to be someone you don't exactly know exactly who she is. Again, I kind of said exactly twice there, but you get the point. I wanted her to be a character that is first mentioned by name so that you don't fully get how she looks or how she's described unless you were to read the prologue, but you don't get your first explanation of how she looks in the chapter, which is a big point. And by doing that, I also want her to be mentioned by someone of importance so that you know that Catherine, although you don't know exactly who she is or what she does, is somebody that should be a little bit on your mind throughout reading the novel series. And I don't have that below as a bulletin point, but I was thinking of having Sir William or Sir Jester introduce her to the story. And Sir William and Sir Jester play pivotal roles within that empire. And this empire in this case is not the Roman Roman Empire, but an unnamed empire, at least yet. So I do think that if I'm going to describe this empire, as you'll see by comparing it to the rich, I do need to name this empire at some point. So that is something I have on my to-do list, and hopefully I'll have a few options and kind of my reasoning behind it for next Monday, so we can kind of brainstorm that idea out loud, and I can get more physically writing on what the empire looks at for that next Monday series. Because I've finally gotten to the point where I can sit down and actually physically write this book and think about this book a lot more now that I've kind of figured out what to do with the series and what with my YouTube channel and other things around that, as I've kind of talked about before. So after mentioning Catherine by name but not showing her, I wanted to move on to introducing Sir William and Sir Jester, as they both play pivotal roles within this empire that is unnamed. The head of the Queen's Guard showing how demanding he is, and that is Sir William. And Sir Jester is kind of the head of defense. And so with him being head of defense, I wanted to obviously talk about him and his defense plan. So I wanted Sir Jester to be someone who knows what he's talking about as far as a character goes. Someone that is very well educated on how to defend the castle and have a defensive plan. And I don't know exactly how I want his attitude to be. I do know how I want Sir William's attitude to be, as if you read the prologue, he's very demanding, kind of seems smart, but in a very bullish way. I don't think I necessarily want to have Sir Jester be that super bullish figure, but more of an intellectually smart figure who's gotten to the top of his defense chain and the royal guard because of his smarts, not necessarily because of his attitude or his soldiery ability, so to speak. But then, at the end of the chapter, I wanted to have Catherine walking through the dungeons. So the reason I kind of picked dungeons was, again, to kind of keep your thoughts on who Catherine is. Let's put it this way: how you think about Catherine as being somebody you're not completely sure of. Although you haven't really heard much about Catherine or who she is, her walking through the dungeons is very odd and doesn't seem particularly right. So it's going to have your minds think about, why would someone be walking through the dungeons in that way? And now white factor is what I want to have with Catherine. And I've kind of been brainstorming the idea through my last live stream and throughout the month whenever I was kind of thinking about the book, and which tends to be every night. Anyway, I was kind of thinking, well, do I want to even have Catherine talk in this first chapter? So that was kind of an idea I had, thinking on if I even wanted to have Catherine have a verbal sentence in this first chapter of the story, or only have her be mentioned through name. And I was kind of thinking, well, I might have her speak, but not necessarily have dialogue with her. So in other words, it would kind of be the character speaking for herself, but not really speaking to anyone. So with her walking through the dungeon, she might be like singing a song or humming a song or talking to the prisoners, although they don't talk back. Things like that. Or if they do talk back, she doesn't really care to listen to what they say. And so she doesn't really have a dialogue with them. So now that I kind of discussed that chapter and we kind of left off to where we began, I figured we can go back and read this first couple paragraphs I wrote on that last live stream, and I'll kind of think out loud and write a little bit as I did on my last live stream for today, and we can start from there. So I decided I was going to start with describing the poor of the castle, or poor of the village. Because those that don't know through my novel research, so I have several Google slides or several Google documents. I have a Google document, of this first idea. And then I have a Google document of the second idea. And then I have a Google document with my research. And then I have a program called Campfire that keeps all my dots together and kind of my brainstorms and my maps and my timelines, so that as I write this book, I'm able to stay on task and to be able to keep my ideas straight, which is going to play a very pivotal role within me writing this story. But as I was kind of saying, I wanted to describe the poor. So a key part of describing the poor and how I want to write my book is I want it to be based on reality and how things actually were. So a large part of my early live streams and my research for my book so far has been how have the peasant life been, or how has the poor of the medieval times been for the people. And I discovered that you have classes. You have peasants and you have serfs. And the only way serfs can kind of really go up in class is by marrying somebody of a higher class. So it'd be like a serf marrying somebody of royalty. And although it probably wouldn't happen very often, that was kind of the only way they could be improved in class. So that was kind of a big thing I researched. But I also researched a lot of what houses or villages were to look like. So in castles during the medieval time, you would have your main part of the castle, I guess you would say, or the castle itself. But a lot of times outside of that castle would have been where the poor of the capital, you would say, lived. And that's where they grew their crops and grew their food and livestock and other things to keep their economy, or to keep their people safe and fed and everything that you need to have a strong empire, a strong castle in that area. And a lot of times where they would live is in these village type of scenarios where you'd have several houses together, and these houses were made out of mud and dried grass and other things related to that. And I also see Ron here in the chat, and thank you, Ron, for coming in. I know that you're a huge help on that last live stream I had, so I appreciate that. And I was just going to kind of read what we wrote on the last empire. And I did give the empire a name, and I have it in quotations here because I don't think that I'm necessarily going to keep that empire's name, because I think it sounds rather cheesy. But I don't exactly know what empire I'm going to choose or name I'm going to choose beforehand. But I was kind of thinking of having a Greek name mixed with like a Roman, or where it looks kind of different looking, but when it's translated to something of meaning. So real quick, this empire is based on next to water mass, and they have ships and a very large navy. Although we don't exactly know that by reading it yet, in the prologue it mentioned that a boat was on their sigil. So you know that their navy is a very big part from who this empire is and how I want this empire to be. So because of that, I wanted their empire name to include something with water or something with importance in that way. So as you'll see when I read the story, you'll get the name that's translated into English from Greek of what has kind of water within the name story. And everything in red is either words I want to change or alternate to words in case I think it sounds better. In the case of D, it's just me writing how I write, and I'm going to come back and change it. But I kind of want to write the full first chapter first before I go back and kind of change all the sentences and add a little bit more detail. So there's a lot of D's, and that's just how I kind of naturally write. And when I go back, those will kind of disappear. But anyway, before I just keep blabbering on, I'll read the parts where we left off before. Excuse me. The summer sunrise hits the northeast castle wall, casting an ominous shadow even the greatest enemy would be afraid of. The poor and the wise were the only ones awake, although they lived very different lives. The village beyond the castle walls never or always knew the time of the day. As the sun grew to its majestic beauty, glowing into this the finest hues of red, oranges, and yellows, Sir Jester, along with the rest of the royalty within the castle walls, never knew this light as a wakeable force. The towering, thick, ashlar stone walls stood so high a giant couldn't even peer over. Walls have stood for hundreds of years as the great empire of Ocean God presence. As in any legendary castle that has stood the test of time, there were several layers amongst its defense. There were 3 castle wall layers. A smaller stone wall serving as the first point of defense. The second wall is a large wall with several lookout towers along with archery towers. Then lastly, the third wall just before the main castle, protecting the important parts of the keep. This wasn't the case for villagers outside the looking eyes upon the hill. And as Ron mentioned, this wasn't the case for villages outside the looking eyes beyond the watchful eyes. Yeah, anyway, you get what I'm saying. Those were 2 alternates there. The houses were all slightly different as they were built with hands of the owner. Although each owner was different, the material was still the same poor mud and dry grasses, therefore causing an uncomfortable unity. The John Smith household also had dry mud and grasses. The house in particular was built with layers upon layers of the west mud, taking many days to dry. I think it's supposed to be wettest. Anyway. Once dry parts of the house could see cracks as the mud decided the result of the time and effort. The John Smith household focusing on farming with the oldest house and the family of the peasant folk. This was because many generations expanded on the house through knowledge and skilled labor. The house was built with 3 different types of mud, as the first acted as a binder, second as a crack resistor, and the final as a smooth holder. The outside layer was covered in dry grass as every other household. The difference with the John Smith house was the grass layering itself. The grass was layered in rows going downward and across, building on itself like a diagonal lashing. So that was kind of where we left off before, and from what I remember from when we last discussed and kind of my idea as a whole, I wanted to describe the John Smith. Although it's an ongoing title, I think I might keep it, although it kind of seems more of a modern American name, although John Smith was kind of a older-ish name as well. But anyway, long story short, I might change the John Smith name. But I wanted to ground the poor people's lives, or the peasants / serfs people's life, in describing one household. And then from describing that household and kind of basing the situation and living conditions from that one household, kind of expand on it and describe the whole of the situation. So basically, I wanted to get super detailed and then look out and then go in to how the rich people lived. And I see Ron's comment here. He says, well, the Byzantines had a navy. Maybe call this empire the Bantium Empire. That's an idea, and I don't think I said that first name right. But anyway, you'll probably correct me later if I said that one wrong. I'm the worst with that, that's for sure. So I was kind of thinking for this last part of the stream, I was going to kind of do what I did last stream, as Ron and a couple others thought it went alright. I was a little afraid it might have been a little bit boring, because I'm kind of thinking out loud and writing out loud. But but last time people seemed to enjoy it, so I'll kind of continue based on that. And obviously I saw a little bit of changes I need to make in sentences and to make them kind of flow a little bit better. But as I kind of already said, I'm trying to just kind of mark which ones I want to go back to and read, or words I might want to change or alternate, and then kind of go back and change the chapter once it's actually physically written. Because I feel once I actually start writing a lot more and getting this chapter fully done, I'll be able to go back and kind of know exactly where I want to go with the next couple of chapters and with the book series as a whole. Because a lot of making this book is kind of thinking a lot and figuring out how things might connect, even in just the first chapter. Obviously, I'm not as good of a writer as like George R. R. Martin, who might be able to write whole bulleted list and figure out how exactly they're going to change with each other just on a slight glance of his eye. But then again, a lot of good books are written and planned out in very good detail before they actually write. So I'm kind of doing both at the same time and trying to figure out which way I kind of like better from there. So since we last discussed about a month ago, I was kind of thinking how I wanted to continue this chapter. And I've kind of already discussed kind of what I was thinking with describing the John Smith household fully, then expanding outward and describing the poor situation as a whole, and then going up to the rich people's lives and how they were to live. So I thought I would kind of continue on. So as reading the last sentence again, or the last two sentences, it said, the difference with the John Smith house was the grass layering itself. The grass was layered in rows going downward and across on the building like a diagonal lashing. So I'll just describe the house. And a lot of times the poor households, they would have livestock actually live within their house as well to keep them protected and to potentially maybe be the night's dinner, although they might had to feed classes above them, or so to speak, their landowners above them. Although that wasn't their title back then, you kind of get the point. Or their village owners, or however else your term might want to be for that. So I thought I just described outside. I was going to go in and describe the inside of the house in a little bit of detail, then kind of briefly discuss the people who were to live in the John Smith household. And then again, as I kind of was saying, go outward and kind of explain an entire condition of the houses. Although I kind of briefly already discussed it, I do think it's a good idea to expand in a little bit more detail about how I want to do that. So I'll kind of think about some ideas, and I thought I would kind of try to write some sentences. Now, if I can't really think of any good sentences to kind of expand on what I was thinking, I was going to do what kind of worked for me in the past and was make a bulleted list that I can furtherly expand upon on the next live stream and have a lot more written. I don't have the paper with me now, but I've been writing a lot of ideas for this first chapter and kind of bouncing around as ideas come in my head about what I might include in it. And I left it in my notebook in my car, and I don't really want to go get that now because it's not really what I want to fully discuss now. But by next stream, I hope to have a lot of those ideas down, at least in bulleted points for you to kind of look at and think about with me, or at least having some writing in some sort of way. So in that bulleted list, from what I can remember and writing on, I'll take a quick drink, and then we'll kind of think about how I want to fully write the story through my ideas I have, and just kind of trying to get them on to the physical paper itself. Needs to be this. All right. All right. So here we go. I hate how I always write the. It's just like a common occurrence I always do when I'm trying to write sentences or think about sentences. It's almost like I have to have the at least for the start. But anyway, I'll get better as I write more, of course. Let's see. Actually, I'll continue this a little bit more. The lashing was no. See, that's the thing. Also, those who have taken any sort of English class or any sort of English tutoring, like I've had done a lot in the past, know about how sentences are structured. And a lot of times you want your sentences to flow really well and to have a lot of verbs and a lot of action and just kind of really set the scene or set the situation really well. And a very bad way of doing that is having being verbs. So I'm trying to also avoid that. Although, like I said, I kind of want to just write out loud and come back and change it later. I also want to make sure that I'm thinking about how to carefully structure the sentence so that when I go back, I can do it even a little bit more better than the time before. The lashing itself. The lashing itself was tightened. That was tiny enough to. No. The lashing itself. Actually, I think I'll continue on later. Upon further look. Upon further look. The layered muds were the layered muds of the John Smith household. The layered muds of the John Smith household were so well constructed. Were so well constructed compared to the rest of the village. I feel like I can't spell anymore. Anyway. The inside the mud. Hopefully the computer's not bouncing around too much when I'm typing this. I have it slightly elevated on a platform so that it's streaming more at me instead of up. But I'm trying to figure out a completely good way to kind of keep the computer from bouncing around when I'm typing. But I think it's a lot better than it was in the past. Anyway, I see Ron saying, a properly installed thatch roof would last 40 to 50 years, the which would have to be replaced every 8 to 10 years. Now, because a lot of what these materials were made out of were, like I said, with dried grass. So that, again, is kind of why I wanted to have John Smith household kind of be the house fully discussed within my story, because I wanted the John Smiths to kind of be a family that has been in this class system for a very long time, and kind of like the elders are the smarts of the village. So by carefully explaining how their house was constructed, you can kind of see how the best of the poor were kind of living, and then I was going to compare that to how kind of the remaining people were living in their lives. And that's kind of what Ron was saying there with this point. I didn't necessarily know that it would take that long to fully construct, but I did know that within a couple years, or he says 8 to 10 years, they would have to be replaced in order to keep from environments and other things and their house collapsing upon where they were staying. So that's kind of how I was going to start the story in explaining the poverty aspect of a household and a family that knows how to get past it. So that's kind of what I was thinking there. As there's some other households. Let's see. We don't need all caps. Excuse me. Okay. Yeah, that's good. And there we go. The Smith household. Smith household. Although was well kept. The Smith household, although was well kept, wasn't the Smith house still had its broken parts. The Smith household, although was still well kept, had its broken parts. These parts would bother. These parts would bother John. These words would bother John Smith as he was the caretaker of but of the whole. Okay, so we have the lands of Mother John Smith household were so well constructed compared to the rest of the village. The Smith household, although was still well kept, still had its broken parts. These parts would bother John Smith as he was the caretaker not only of his family, but of the whole village. Everyone in his family had jumped to So I'm debating if I want to describe what all of his family jobs were, or what they had to do in their household and in their village, or if I want to go a different route. So obviously I want to have John Smith have a daughter and at least have a son, so to have one of each gender. But I'm thinking that he's probably going to have more than 2 kids, and so having their roles and what they're involved in is going to be very important. So I think I'm going to kind of think about that. And although this was a little shorter than the other streams, and I appreciate Ron Helton stopping by. I am going to have to end it here, and by next Monday, I hope to have a lot more fully put on paper. I have a lot of ideas and where I want to go further in the chapter, not so much this part of the chapter, as my mind kind of went wandering a little bit ahead of itself. So getting all those ideas down on paper and fully fleshing out this early part of the chapter, I think, would kind of show a forward picture and what I've kind of thought about in this past month. And so I hope that the next stream, next Monday, in the sixth one of this novel series, you'll kind of fully understand where I'm kind of going with my first chapter. But before I head out of here, Ron said maybe the family had one of the few looms in the town that the wife and daughter used to make extra money. Yeah, that's an idea as well, for sure. And there's a lot of things I can kind of explore on and what jobs were like in the medieval times that we necessarily don't have today. Our situations and class type of structures and what typical, you could say, gender roles were like back in the medieval times. So it is something I can definitely explore on. And I appreciate all your ideas, Ron, and you definitely helped the stream go by a lot more. And I know that all the other Freedom Scoopers enjoy your input as well. But like I said, I'm going to have to get out of here and do something else for the day. And also I'm working on another video I hope to have out tomorrow. I hope to have out a lot more videos, but I've kind of gotten behind. But this one should be finished by tomorrow, so I will look out for my channel for my video tomorrow. But again, thank you, Ron, for stopping by, and anyone else who might stop by later. And I'll make sure to add everything down in the description. And see you for the next novel stream on Monday. And peace out.